As you guys can see, the Yu Yu Hakusho live action series has dropped on Netflix, and for better or worse, I have decided that I am going to binge the shit out of it today to tell you guys if it is truly shit or maybe it's something worth checking out. I don't know. I don't feel like we have a very good track record of live action anime, especially when it comes to Netflix. Now, a lot of people will say the One Piece live action was really good. I can't talk about that because I never watched it and I don't care about One Piece, but I do care about Yu Yu Hakusho, and I really, really care about Cowboy Bebop. And I was burned so hard with that series, and I was pushing for that. I was pulling for that. I like the actors. I like the cast. I like the costumes. I like the trailers. I was like, Cowboy Bebop live action series might actually be good. And then I just witnessed a vomit-inducing, disgusting, horrid abortion of something that I love on the screen over and over again, episode by episode, just tearing into my heart and ripping out my soul and making me miss those days I used to stay up late on Adult Swim watching one of the greatest anime ever created, only to now be forced to watch this horrid, disgusting soup of disgust. But maybe the Yu Yu Hakusho live action will be better. However, there are some red flags here. I have not watched any of it yet. I'm going to be watching this right now, and I'm going to do an episode-by-episode update for you. Obviously, I can't watch the episodes on YouTube because copyright, so I'm going to watch the episodes individually, and I'm going to report back after every single episode. Now, the first red flag I see is that there are only 5 episodes of the entire first season. And I don't know if this is one of those cases where they're releasing half the season at once or if this is the entire thing, but I think it's the entire thing because you can see right here, episode 5, Yusuke comes face to face with Toguro. Now, if you know anything about the Yu Yu Hakusho series, you know that Toguro is not introduced until, towards the finale of the first arc, like the very, very end, okay? For context, in the anime, Toguro is introduced in episode 22, okay? Episode 22. Here he's introduced in episode 5. But the episodes you see, they're about an hour long, almost an hour apiece. So if you count that in time of anime episodes, I suppose that would be around episode 15. So still not where Toguro shows up, but, getting there. But I don't think that they're going to adapt everything that happens in those 15 episodes. And look, I understand a live action series, it needs to be different. It needs to change the story a little bit. You can't do everything you can do in anime and live action. Things have to be adapted, right? It's an adaptation, not a direct, interpretation. Or wait, do I have that backwards? I don't know, man. Considering the amount of events that happen in the canon that I know before you get to Toguro, in order to go through all of that within 4 episodes, or even less than that, because Yukina is here in episode 4. So, Yukina is also introduced in episode 22. So, I don't know how fast they're going to roll through this shit, what they're going to skip. Obviously, they can't do the Genkai stuff. Obviously, they can't do the Saint Beast stuff. So, those are the things they're cutting out. So, it looks like they're going to go right from Yusuke's first mission, encountering Hiei and Kurama, to the rescue Yukina stuff, which is insane and ridiculous and skips a whole bunch of context and character building and development and stuff. And obviously we're not having any Yusuke ghost adventures, which is something that the anime didn't really adapt a lot of either, but it's in a lot of the manga. I thought maybe, the live action series, if they took their time, maybe they would do a little bit more of the Yusuke as a ghost thing, but that's not happening here either. So I really don't know what to expect. I also love how it is rated TVMA for smoking and violence. For smoking. Smoking makes it MA. Maybe it's because they're teenagers, and teenagers shouldn't be smoking. Nobody should be smoking. But anyways, guys, this is just my introduction, so I'm going to get into episode 1, and once I finish it, I'm going to tell you what I think about it. Hopefully, we will not watch my sanity slowly drain out of my body as this video goes on. Maybe this will boost my spirits. I don't know. I woke up feeling a little bit off today. Maybe this will help me feel better. Let's go. All right, so episode 1. I have some positives and I have a lot of negatives, but let's get right into it and let's just talk about the overall tone of this episode. I think I understand what they're going for here, but the problem with this episode, and I feel like the problem with the majority of what this is going to be, given the fact that this is only 5 episodes long, is that they are trying to cram so much of the Yu Yu Hakusho lore and story and all of the elements within the entire series into like a condensed little orb ball of it in order to push it all out within 5 episodes. And I feel like this is going to be to the detriment of the series because they are skipping very, very important character building moments and character beats in order to get to the bigger stuff that happens. And Yu Yu Hakusho is kind of known for having a little bit of a slower start. A lot of people, especially nowadays, if you go back and try to watch the anime, a lot of people won't make it past the first couple episodes because they're expecting, this crazy action extravaganza, when really the beginning of Yu Yu Hakusho is very much meant to build up its characters, to help you understand them on a personal and emotional level, so that when you get to the big action stuff later on, it has more of an impact. But a lot of people are impatient, and a lot of people only want to watch anime for fight scenes, in which case Yu Yu Hakusho is probably not the anime for you. Regardless, the first episode here definitely introduces a lot of elements that are not going to be incorporated into the series until much later, but it's trying to jumpstart everything and introduce it right away. The tunnel to Demon World is already introduced. This giant sinkhole in the middle of the city. And this is not something that happens until way, way after the Dark Tournament. Well, after the Dark Tournament. Okay? So that's already in play. You've already introduced Sakio and Terukane. So, again, that's like the whole Toguro stuff. They didn't introduce Toguro in the first episode. They introduced the Makai insects, although I think they called them something different. These are these little demon bugs that fly around and they can get inside somebody and infect them. In the anime and manga, they kind of become like a zombie version of themselves with a lot more tendencies towards violence. Like, they can still talk and communicate. They still have an awareness of who they are, but they're much more hyper-violent. In this episode, in this series, it basically like mutates them into becoming a demon. So it's very, very different. They might have actually had a completely different type of bug, but that's the idea of where it comes from. And it's coming because the barrier between Demon World and Human World is getting more thin, which is also something that happens after the Dark Tournament in the anime. So they're already throwing all of that in. Now, another thing that I think really bogs it down is because you don't have the time to build up the characters the way that you should. You have Yusuke, who was introduced in the beginning as a ghost, like the same way that he is in the original series. However, in this version, I feel like they don't really like double down onto understanding Yusuke's character rather than just being told it through Botan or Koenma, rather than seeing it for ourselves. Now, this may seem like a nitpick, but I actually think it has to do with Yusuke's character, is the fact that he wears a green school uniform, where the rest of the school doesn't. They wear blue, and that's why Kuwabara wears blue. And so in this, they kind of reversed it. But I think that it is privy to a lot of Yusuke's characteristics because he is rebellious by nature. He doesn't want to do what people tell him to do. He doesn't want to do what authority tells him to do. Like, he's very much rebellious against society, against his school, against everything. He skips class all the time. He's viewed as a delinquent, and even to some people, like a bully. And even to some people, they think that he might be in some kind of gang. Like, he has this reputation, for being this street kid, this street punk, right? He comes from a broken home. His mom is supposed to be a drunk. He doesn't have a father figure. So he doesn't really have any guidance or anything to look up to or any kind of importance in his life or anything to throw his energy into, no pun intended, in order to give him some kind of direction or some kind of purpose, right? And so originally, when you see him save the child from the bus that's driving by, and it's a car in the anime and manga, there's a moment where you follow him through his day and you see that he is this kind of like hot-tempered, fly off the handle kind of character. But when it comes to this kid that is playing by the street, Yusuke takes the time in order to tell him, hey, you shouldn't play by the street. He talks to the kid. He makes the kid laugh. He plays with him for a second. And it gives him this moment of, relating to this childhood innocence and basically showing that Yusuke does have a really good heart. You don't get to see him interact with the kid at all in this episode. Like, the kid is there. He jumps in front of the bus and he dies. But he doesn't really have a moment to connect with the kid at all. And I feel like that takes something away from Yusuke's character because you don't really get to see him go from being that punk kid to kind of opening up and being, childlike and child-hearted and playing with the kid. They do try to do that a little bit where he saves a kid from being bullied in school. So that kind of takes the place of it. But I think it's more important to do it with the kid because that directly leads into how Yusuke dies. Another thing, because this series is speeding through things so quickly, when Yusuke dies and becomes a ghost, the whole idea was they never planned for him to die because it doesn't seem like it would be within his character for him to be so self-sacrificial. So they give him an ordeal to bring his life back, right? and that has to do with like the egg that he has to carry around for a few episodes, and then he decides to sacrifice the egg in order to save Keiko's life. None of that happens here. So here in this version, he just dies. Botan shows up, takes him to Koenma. Koenma is already in his adult form, which, again, like, you have Koenma there in an adult form with a pacifier in his mouth. Nobody mentions the pacifier. The whole joke is that Koenma is like a baby, but he's like thousands of years old, or he's like a toddler, right? So he sucks on a pacifier. The pacifier itself does have a bigger purpose that's not revealed till later on. So seeing a grown man just with a pacifier in his mouth, and nobody talks about it, nobody mentions it, just kind of strange. Also, it's part of the joke that he creates an adult form because everyone makes fun of him for being a toddler. That's just like, that's what the joke is. But we don't get that here. And he immediately just tells Yusuke, hey, you're going to be a spirit detective. And I just feel like, I get it. You only have 5 episodes. You got to do what you got to do. But there's no building to Koenma recognizing that Yusuke has the potential to be an actual hero, you know? It's through his ordeal. It's through him doing good deeds. And in the manga, that goes on much further. And, like, I don't know what Togashi originally intended the series to be, but in the manga, you know, Yusuke goes on these ghost adventures and basically helps people from beyond the grave. And there's a lot of wholesome moments and characters that he, you know, helps out and everything. And all of that leads into Yusuke kind of deep down being a good dude that wants to do good things. He just has this sort of like barrier, rebellious attitude on the outside because of the kind of upbringing that he had. But he really is a good person, and that all culminates when he sacrifices his chance at life in order to save Keiko, which doesn't happen here. So, you know, Koenma deciding that he's the spirit detective now just seems to come out of nowhere. And I guess if you have no knowledge of the manga and anime, maybe that can work. But for me, it really, really doesn't work, because why? Why is Yusuke the spirit detective? Like, what has he done to, like, earn that title? You know what I mean? It just kind of comes out of nowhere. The Yusuke funeral scene, I think, was done all right. You know, I think that the actresses that played Yusuke's mom and Keiko, they do a fine job kind of, you know, showing their mourning and everything. I don't think it quite hits as emotionally as the anime and manga does, but it does its job fine. And I think that, you know, that scene, I remember watching that for the first time in the anime, and that scene was like what really made me love this show, just seeing that emotion right away. Like, you know, they're really going to take their time and build up these characters, and like these characters mean something, and they mean something to each other. With Kuwabara in the series, you know, I don't know the design choice for him, why they chose to try to make all the other characters look very accurate, but then Kuwabara is just kind of, I don't know. Just doesn't look like Kuwabara. But anyways, he's okay. But again, you know, his like emotional scene during the funeral scene, I don't feel like hits the same way. I feel like in this version it was a little bit more comedic, whereas in the manga and anime, you know, it was more emotional. So that didn't really work for me. And the finale of this episode is kind of like the big action sequence, right? So Yusuke gets his life back because he is saving Keiko in the moment, but he's not sacrificing anything. He just gets his life back. Which kind of does take away from Keiko's, you know, whatever. Anyways, so big fight scene is that one of the kids that was getting bullied gets the Makai insect into his ear, transforms him into a demon. He starts beating the shit out of the bullies. He beats the shit out of Kuwabara. Yusuke shows up, and a big fight scene goes down. I'll say for the choreography, of the fight scene was done very, very well. I actually looked up, I think one of the guys that worked on the Rurouni Kenshin live action worked on the fight scenes of this, and you can tell it's very exaggeratory. There's a lot of like sliding on the ground. There's a lot of flips. There's a lot of cameras kind of moving around. And honestly, the choreography is pretty good. So I got to give you my positive. You know, I can't just be 100% shitting on the series or anything like that. I got to give you guys my honest opinions. And honestly, the fight scenes are pretty good. The only thing is that I just don't feel like they're earned yet, right? As far as like the story and building up the characters and getting to Yusuke versus demons, I feel like it's just so much so soon. Like, they're just throwing so much at you so quickly, and I feel like that's the direction the series is going to go. Even by the end of the episode, they introduce Hiei and Kurama and Goki. And, you know, that fight scene was cool. I don't know what they're fighting. I think they're fighting the cultivated humans, but that's not explained what they are. And, like, it looks cool. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, it looks cool. The fight scene looks cool, but it's like, who are these characters? And why? You know, if you don't know, then it's just a cool scene to look at. But if you do know, you recognize that now's not the time. Like, there needs to be more time to build these characters. But like I said, you have 5 episodes, so you can't really do it. Okay, episode 2. I'm actually a little bit more positive on this episode, believe it or not. And you know why? Because this episode took its time. Yes, this was a character building episode. This is probably what they should have done from the start, but I understand, you know, looking at episode 1 and 2 together, that if nobody has ever seen Yu Yu Hakusho before, I guess they want to start off episode 1 just throwing as much at you as possible, just saying like, hey, watch our show. And then episode 2 kind of pulls it back a little bit. However, it still does have its action sequences in the beginning, but episode 2 of the live action pretty much follows episode 7 of the anime and stretches it out a little bit. It adds different context, obviously, because you missed so much stuff in the early episodes of building up Kuwabara and the fact that he has a really good spirit awareness and that he can sense, you know, supernatural things. Completely disregarded in the first episode. Second episode, he can see Botan, who in this version has not created a human body for herself, so basically showing that he has the spirit awareness to pick her up. He doesn't confess that she's beautiful and ask her to be his wife upon meeting her, which is the Kuwabara Riz. I guess they're saving that for Yukina. It's also how I introduce myself to girls. I'm still single, by the way. Anyways, when I see a beautiful blue-haired pink kimono girl, I mean, obviously you're going to ask her to be your wife. I mean, it just makes sense. Anyways, the point is, this episode takes its time. It has the artifacts that are stolen. The Orb of Bas, I'm knowing the English dub versions, but the Forlorn Hope and the sword they changed to, and this is the biggest, I'll just get my gripe out of the way. All right, the biggest gripe I have with this episode is with Hiei. And Hiei's only in 2 scenes. But instead of the sword that he steals as the artifact, he steals a dagger, and I literally had to rewind because I was like, did I just watch happen what I think I saw happen? Where Hiei takes the dagger and gives himself the Jagan Eye. Nothing about the Jagan Eye is explained, although you can get it from context clues that he's looking for, that he's following the Yukina tears. But Hiei giving himself the Jagan Eye just completely eviscerates so much backstory and lore of who Hiei is, where he came from, how he left Demon World, what happened with him, like everything that is in the backstory of Hiei that is important to his character leads to him getting the Jagan Eye is completely eviscerated, ripped away. We're never going to see it play out that way. Now look, do I think the live action will get far enough into the series that, you know, we'll get to Hiei's backstory? Well, considering they're condensing so much into 5 episodes, maybe. So I guess they're just counting on not getting that far into the series to where you go back and see like why and how Hiei got his Jagan Eye. But yeah, he just gives it to himself. Horrible idea. Horrible idea. Just straight up out the gate, just horrible idea. But on the positive side, this follows him trying to get the artifacts back, and he goes through fighting Goki, which, I mean, I'm not going to give the CGI any shit because it is a series, it's not a movie, it's not super high budget, and I think they did a fine job with what it was, especially considering the fact that CGI was all in broad daylight, which makes it harder to hide any of the imperfections. So I think they did a fine job. The fight was fine. He actually defeats Goki pretty much the same way, where he like holds his mouth open and shoots a spirit gun. Although this time that was his first time using the spirit gun. A little bit different, but the same. They also build up the dynamic between the child that he saved a little bit more in this episode, which is interesting that they chose to kind of wait until afterwards to do that. But I like that it was here. And then the second half of the episode deals with Kurama and discovering what he is all about. Talks about how he, you know, took human form. His mother is sick, and although the Forlorn Hope looks like an iPad and not a mirror, you know, it works kind of the same way. Although the CGI elaborate kind of like weird swirly smoke area, I thought that was, I don't know. I thought it worked better in the anime where it's just like light shining from a mirror. You know, they could have done that simply and not spent a bunch of money on CGI. I don't know why they did it this way, but whatever. I think it works fine. I don't really like Kurama's design. I don't like his wig. He looks like he should be like a Tumblr user or something. I don't really know what's going on with him. But, you know, it's fine. And it was slower paced, and I liked it. I liked the second half. I mean, as far as like, look, I liked it in the context of like this live action. Did I like it in the fact that I'm going to recommend it to everybody and rewatch it again? Probably not. I'm just saying, I think it's an improvement over episode 1. And the finale of episode 2 introduces Toguro. Yeah, Toguro in episode 2. And Elder Toguro up on his shoulder looked really bad. Like, the CGI was really bad. And I'm going to try to give the CGI the benefit of the doubt for the most part, because I understand TV show budgets. I get it. But he looked really bad. No real mention of the sinkhole in this episode, or the Makai insects or the demon insects or anything. They're just kind of just not mentioned in this episode. So I don't know, man. Gonna go into episode 3 and we'll see how it goes. Okay, I take back any of the improvements I said about episode 2, because this episode throws it all out the goddamn window. If we are doing a Yu Yu Hakusho speed run of the series, episode 3 of the live action definitely takes the cake. Let me spoil the shit out of this for you guys. Okay, this episode incorporates the first fight with Yusuke and Hiei. It incorporates Tarukane going to Sakyo's mansion instead of the other way around, where he introduces Toguro, and they have that scene where Toguro fights the demonic creature and punches it in half. That part was kind of cool. That's the only thing I liked about this whole episode. The actor they picked to play Toguro, look, I'm not picking on him. I don't have the best physique in the world, but the dude is not jacked whatsoever. So all of Togoro's powers of becoming big and strong is CGI. And I expected it to be CGI, but I didn't expect them to not have at least a dude that looks reminiscent to like a bodybuilder type build as the character. Toguro is completely skinny, no gains whatsoever. Elder Toguro looks very, very weird with the CGI, but they did get his powers right, so I guess there's that. But that's not my problem with this episode. My problem is everything that comes after this, because the main problem with this series is just trying to cram so much shit at you all at once. This is only episode 3, and these episodes are only 45 minutes to an hour long. And we are talking about material and lore and plot lines that go like episodes, like 20, 30, 40, 50 episodes into the series that are building up characters. And that is the problem with this series. And that is the main problem I had with episode 1. And the problem has 10 times multiplied with episode 3. The fact that you don't have any time to build any connection or emotion with these characters, and it just throws so much lore at you. For example, the entirety of Team Toguro is introduced in episode 3. Toguro, Karasu, Bui, they're all there already. They're not characters you meet until well into the Dark Tournament. By the way, all of that happens before you even meet Genkai. Now, because those characters exist, they're like, oh, Yusuke needs to get stronger, so we need to send him for training. So they just send him to Genkai's. Yusuke and Kuwabara go to Genkai's together, but it's just them. There's no Genkai tournament. There's no her trying to find her successor or anything. And there's barely any dynamic between Yusuke and Genkai. You don't get a feeling for their relationship whatsoever. Like, all you get is the generic, like, oh, he kind of shows up, slacks off on his training a little bit. Kuwabara's training harder, so then Yusuke wants to train harder. There's no dynamic of like the back and forth like banter between Genkai and Yusuke, and how they like give each other shit, and how, you know, Genkai really begins the series where she's kind of like broken and distraught. She spent 50 years up on a mountain, and she got to the point where she doesn't even care who she gives her abilities to, because she just is gonna, you know, pass on what she's learned before she dies. And it's Yusuke that kind of opens her up and brings her back to who she was before she went and became a hermit, and like she had, you know, she was like this demon fighter of her own, and had this whole backstory and history and all this stuff that like Yusuke brings out of her and kind of opens her up. At the same time, she really opens Yusuke up, and like they have this really strong bond while also constantly talking shit to each other, which is nowhere to be found in this episode. By the way, again, if you know anything about the series, okay, Genkai is introduced, trains Yusuke, gives him her spirit wave orb, which is like something, again, that doesn't happen till mid-Dark Tournament. That is this big, like, transcendent moment for Yusuke's character, that he has to endure this pain and turmoil and try to like accept it, you know, and absorb it into his body. She even feels really bad for him at the time. Like, he's supposed to go through all this training before he gets it, and when he does, you know, he goes through this like horrendous like body, you know, transformation where like he's basically like bleeding out of all of his cuts and scrapes, and he can barely contain it, and she feels bad and she tries to take it back, and he's like, no, I'm doing this. This is important. I need this. It's a whole like big moment where he like is in this cave and he like, basically has this like big transcendent character moment. It's nowhere to be found here. She's just like, oh, by the way, here's a spirit wave orb. And he's like, oh, thanks. And that's it. But that's not even the worst. That's like 20 minutes after Genkai is introduced. So that happens. And then they blow their load even further. And they have Toguro show up to Genkai's, her hut in the woods or whatever you want to call it, her establishment. The whole fight you don't see. You also don't know anything about their backstory. The only thing it shows you with Genkai and Toguro is a photograph of young Toguro. By the way, if you don't even like recognize the actor well enough, you're not even going to realize that's Toguro in the photo. Anyways, he shows up and he's like, well, I guess you gave Yusuke all that he needed. How do you even give a shit about Yusuke? You haven't even met him yet. There's been no dynamic whatsoever between Toguro and Yusuke. They literally have not met each other yet. Genkai is introduced, trains Yusuke, gives him the spirit wave orb, and dies, presumably, because you don't really get a confirmation of death, but the scene happens, all within the span of 20 to 30 minutes. One episode. Genkai's entire arc of the entire anime is done in one episode. And this is before, like, the team is even established. This is before Kuwabara even meets Hiei. Bro, I mean, I understand taking liberties. I understand doing an adaptation, but this is just like the fucking Yu Yu Hakusho speed. Let's just blow our load entirely. Oh, and it also shows the portal to Demon World that Sakio is trying to create, so that's already a thing. At this rate, I literally would not be surprised if Ryzen and Yomi show up in the last episode. Like, at the rate and speed and veracity that they are going through the series, I would not be surprised if, like, episode 5 is the Three Kings arc. Like, at this point. Wow, I did not expect this, man. I expected to have some complaints going all the way through, but episode 3 really fucking took it, like, all the way to the balls, dude. Like, all the way down, like, straight, like, the entire shaft, down to the balls, including the balls, and even, like, reaching for the asshole. That's what this episode did. So basically, if you're expecting to use the Yu Yu Hakusho live action as a way to get somebody into the series, or if you're experiencing it for the first time through the live action, you're not going to understand the importance of anything that you're watching. I really wish this show would have just taken its time, man. I understand. Okay, you only get 5 episodes, so why not do the series up until where Yusuke fights Hiei and have the final episode be Yusuke versus Hiei? Why not do that? You could do that in 5 episodes. You absolutely could. To try to include everything now, stuff from the Dark Tournament, all these extra characters, all these big plot, pivotal moments, ignoring dynamics between characters because you want to rush to get to something else, not giving any time to marinate between why is Yusuke going to care that Genkai died because they spent, 15 minutes together? It's just like, bruh, man. All right, episode 4, let's go. I know the major problem with this series. Yes, it is that they're trying to cram everything all at once. But it's also, I think, deliberately trying to rely on references from the anime as opposed to create its own story as well. What I mean by that is, in this episode, episode 4, by the way, at the end of the last episode, Keiko gets kidnapped by Elder Toguro, even though Yukina is already kidnapped, so I don't know why they needed to add Keiko being kidnapped also. I don't know. They're both kidnapped. Also, Yukina barely has any lines of dialogue whatsoever. So they go to try to rescue them, right? And they're going to the same exact island that the Dark Tournament was on in the anime series. Except here it's Sakio's mansion instead. So they go there, and as soon as they enter, they begin getting attacked. Karasu shows up and starts fighting Kurama. The others go on their own, and then Bui shows up and starts fighting Hiei. And then Kuwabara goes off on his own. He ends up meeting Yukina and Keiko. The only moment of this episode I really enjoyed was when Kuwabara met Yukina for the first time, because it's pretty character accurate, and it's what you would expect would happen, and he falls in love instantly. So that was cool. Everything else about this episode is just a reference to things that have happened in the anime, but there's no impact or build up to make them matter within the context of their own series. For example, in this episode, Karasu fights Kurama. Why should that fight matter? We have no idea. There's no reason that it should matter in this live action series. In the anime, there is some buildup where Karasu kind of views Kurama as this kind of thing that he wants to destroy, that he's really fond of. And it's this weird kind of like almost sexual dynamic to it. Yeah, it is a thing, right? This is the same author that created Hisoka, so, you know, that could be in there. But it's a buildup, right? And when Kurama is battling him in this episode, I realized a couple of things. I realized, number one, unless I missed it, which I might have, I don't remember there ever being a line of dialogue to explain Kurama's powers. Like the fact that he utilizes his energy to manipulate plant life and can create weapons out of plants. Yes, he's had the rose whip the entire time, but have they even explained that it's a rose whip? He's just had a green whip with thorns on it. Like, I might have missed a line of dialogue, but I don't recall them ever explaining Kurama's abilities. They never explained the death plant. They never explained anything before this moment. So you don't even know what Kurama can actually do. But there's this moment that happens where Kurama transforms into his full demon form, Yoko Kurama. He just does it. He doesn't need anything to help him do it. He just does it. And why should this matter? Who is Yoko Kurama? Do we really care? No. In the live action series, there's nothing to make... This moment doesn't mean anything because we don't even know what the fuck we're looking at. Like, it's just a moment where they're fighting, Kurama's getting beat down, and then he powers up and he's in his full demon form. In the anime and manga, he can't do that. Like, his biology literally limits him from being able to do that because the entire point is that he was a demon that came to human world, took on the body of a pregnant... went into the stomach of a pregnant woman, became basically her offspring, and then grew up in a human body. So he basically has like a demon soul inside of a human body. That's who he is, right? He reverts back to his full demon form in the anime because he encounters something called the Iden box, which is meant to revert your biology to an earlier form of your life. And it happens completely by accident. The character that uses the Iden box on Kurama doesn't know who Kurama is. So he uses it, it goes too far, and he reverts all the way back like pre-human fetus into his demon form, and it's this big moment. There's no big moment in this episode, he just does it. He does it for a little while, and then he gets tired out, and then he goes back to his regular Kurama form. Now, they recreate the moment from the Dark Tournament. They recreate Yoko Kurama using, I think it's the Ogiji plant. I don't know how to pronounce it, but the big plant that basically, like, you know, chases Karasu around the tournament floor. That's all redone in this episode. And if you are aware of the anime and that scene, you could be like, oh, cool, look at the reference to that scene. It's that moment that happened. But in the context of the live action show itself, it doesn't really matter because you don't know what the fuck is going on. You're even like what is this ability? Did they even explain that Kurama can manipulate plants? I don't know. The same thing happens with Hiei versus Bui. The whole fight happens. Bui takes off his armor, gets stronger, and Hiei decides to use the Dragon of the Darkness Flame. Again, it's not built up. Like in the entire Dark Tournament arc, Hiei has to condition himself to be able to utilize it. The Dragon of the Darkness Flame is this ability that pulls on these like endless fires of Spirit World and can potentially consume the user. Almost nobody masters this ability because it's too dangerous to use. First time Hiei uses it, he fucks himself up. Like, it's this whole thing. It's Hiei's entire story arc of the Dark Tournament is being able to condition himself in order to use the Dragon of the Darkness Flame. So that when he uses it against Bui in one of the most badass, best fights of the entire anime, it is a huge, profound moment that he is the guy that has finally mastered the Darkness Flame. In this live action episode, he uses it and like, you know, it's just like this CGI thing that comes out and it attacks Bui and then Bui is defeated. And like, it doesn't, like, you don't feel any impact from it. You don't feel any emotion from it. You don't feel any triumph from it. You don't feel anything because they don't even tell you what the fucking Dragon of the Darkness Flame is. He's just like, well, I guess I got to use this now. And he uses it and it's done. It's just like nothing, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It's just like, unless you already know, unless you're already a fan and you already know what the Darkness Flame is, it doesn't matter. But if you're trying to make a live action series, then shouldn't it stand on its own? Shouldn't it have its own impact? Shouldn't you feel something from it? And this is my biggest problem with it, is because they're just cramming so much shit in and nothing is explained and nothing matters. And all of these big, like, you could have good choreography, you could have good fight scenes, but if you don't have an emotional tie and impact with the characters that are having those fight scenes, then it just becomes a visual, fun thing to look at for 10 minutes. And I could say that, yeah, the fight scene between Karasu and Kurama, it was cool to look at. It was choreographed well. Karasu is even using his bombs. Like, they're using their attacks and stuff from the anime. It's like, oh, cool. It's cool to see that in live action. But, like, it's just kind of there. And Karasu was only introduced one episode ago, and now he's dead. It's like the same thing with Genkai in the previous episode. She's introduced, she trains Yusuke, she gives him the Spirit Wave Orb, and she dies all within the span of 20 minutes. And so that is a huge detriment to the series. I can't imagine where episode 5 is going to end. Episode 4 ended with a cliffhanger. Yusuke is about to fight Toguro. Kuwabara is about to fight Elder Toguro. And the portal to Demon World is opening. So for all I know, I could be right. We could literally get Ryzen and Yomi in the next episode, for all I know. I don't know, man. Anyways, there's no time to waste. One episode left. I'll be right back for you guys. All right. I have finished the Yu Yu Hakusho live action series, so you don't have to. And yeah, this is a horrendous disappointment, man. This is a very big disappointment. I understood things need to be changed. They're not going to do things the same way. But let me just give you an example, okay? The Dark Tournament arc from Yu Yu Hakusho is not only considered mostly by fans to be the best arc of the series, even though I like Chapter Black a little bit more, but that's besides the point. Not only is it widely considered to be the best, but it's also considered to be the best tournament arc in all of anime. But based upon how this first season ends and how it introduces its characters, if they ever did more Yu Yu Hakusho live action, we are definitively never getting a Dark Tournament arc. Why? Because the things that happen in this episode are from the finale of the Dark Tournament arc. So if you ever attempted to try to do one, you would have to make up completely new characters, because the entirety of Dark Tournament revolves around the dynamic between Yusuke and Toguro and ends in that final battle of Yusuke versus Toguro. For example, the final scene of this episode, well, right before the final scene where it shows Toguro in the afterlife, heading to purgatory, essentially. For context, that happens in episode 66 of the anime. I tried to figure that out before I recorded this, if I'm remembering correctly. Episode 66. So 66 episodes worth of material crammed into 5 episodes. That's what we're looking at. Yusuke and Toguro have no history whatsoever. The first time that they meet is the first time that they fight, which is the time where Toguro is destroyed at the end of the fight. It all happens at, not Tarukane's compound, but Sakio's compound. It all happens here. One big fight happens all at once. And you see some of the other characters jump in. Kurama and Hiei show up, and they fight with Toguro as well. Eventually, things kind of go in the flow of the Toguro versus Yusuke fight, where Elder Toguro shows up and he talks about the history between Toguro and Genkai, and he shows, he manipulates his arm to look like Genkai. That's all taken straight out of the anime. Again, what this live action series is doing is basically giving us particular scenes and particular fights from the anime, but just kind of throwing it all at us at once, not really making its own thing, making its own story. It's just throwing remember this scene, this scene, this scene, this scene, and it's just kind of all getting, bombarded at once. And so that scene happens, and so you get a little bit more context with Toguro and Genkai and their history, but not a ton of it. Also, one thing I guess I'll give a little bit of credit to this episode for doing is it does show a bit of the flashback of Togoro's history, where Kairin, killed all of Togoro's students, and you actually see a CGI, monster demon of Kairin, which is kind of cool to see in live action. I didn't know what they were doing with it at first, because they introduced the episode starts with a little bit of the flashback, and you're not really sure what's going on, and then eventually in the episode they go back to it. So I guess it was kind of cool to see something like that in live action, because you wouldn't expect to, but that was about the only thing in this episode that I actually enjoyed. Everything else just felt so rushed, just so ridiculous. And then when Toguro transformed into his full power, I try to give the CGI the benefit of the doubt because I know it's a lower budget like TV show, but like, dear fucking God, Full Power Toguro looks so bad. Like, so, like, they couldn't have at least, like, just given him, like, gray skin. Like, why did they have to try to animate all these weird little muscle contortions and whatever, and then, like, have the actor's face still look exactly the same, but then add all this CGI over it to, like, it just didn't, bro, like, I'm sorry. Like, they massacred my boy, man. They massacred my boy. Toguro, they massacred him, man. Yeah, things pretty much end the same. You know, he goes to attack Kuwabara. Kuwabara falls down. Yusuke powers up, does the full blast spirit gun. They do the finale the exact same way where Togoro's trying to block it and then, you know, eventually explodes, kills him. And then they try to add in all this, like, emotional backstory afterwards where it's just, like, it works in the anime because you have an entire arc of Toguro. Whereas in the show, he's only existed, like, there's no connection here. Like, there's no connection between Yusuke and Toguro whatsoever. And you didn't even explain the connection between Toguro and Genkai other than just a few lines of dialogue in episode 5. And so, you know, at the end where Toguro is kind of walking to Limbo or wherever it is that he goes and meets Genkai in the afterlife, you know, they try to have this resonant emotional moment with it, but you don't feel anything because you didn't go on a journey with these characters. They just show up, you know, Togoro's there, Team Togoro's introduced, episode 4 they fight, episode 5 Toguro fights, Toguro dies. So, like, it just is kind of there. Like, and that's my biggest problem with this whole show is just that things just kind of happen. Things are just kind of there. And the only reason they would ever mean anything to you is if you're already a fan of the series. But being a fan of the series and having been a fan for over 20 years since it first premiered in America, you know, this just felt cheap to me. This just felt like they were just trying to, like, get to the big moments without caring about character. Like, they were putting, you know, all these big plot points in and all these big moments in that are really cool in context, but they were trying so hard to get to them and to show them, they forgot about what really makes this series stand out, and that's the relationship dynamic between its characters. It's building the team of Yusuke, Hiei, Kurama, and Kuwabara and all of their interactions. And they have, like, a small little moment of Kuwabara and Hiei bickering, but it's like one scene. You know, they don't really take the time to build up their relationship. They don't really take the time to build the team. They don't take the time to build Genkai. They don't take the time to do anything. They just get to all these big moments. They just have to kind of, you know, keep rolling the dice and get to the next big thing. They completely disregard the Dark Tournament, which I think is crazy. Like, why would you not end this episode on a cliffhanger of Toguro, you know, Yusuke and Kuwabara fighting Toguro like they do at the end of the first arc of the anime, and then you think Togoro's dead, but then he comes back and then he tells Yusuke he's got to fight in the tournament. Wouldn't a great cliffhanger to the first season be the fact that Yusuke is going to be forced to fight in this demon tournament? That's the storyline. That's what's supposed to happen. It doesn't happen. And then they could have done that. They could have had, like, you know, Chu and, you know, Jin and all these other characters. They could have done that in season 2. But now, if you do a season 2, you're going to be forced to jump all the way to Chapter Black. You're going to miss the entire Dark Tournament, which, again, like I said, is like the fan favorite arc of the entire series and arguably the best tournament arc in all of anime and manga. And now it's just completely eradicated. It's never going to happen. As far as the portal to Demon World, they don't really double down on that in this episode. Nothing really happens. It is opening at the end of episode 4, but by this one, it's basically destroyed. Sakio, you know, offs himself, although you don't see it happen, so it's not definitive here. Whereas in the anime, after the Dark Tournament arc, you know, Sakio does definitively die, and all of his work dies with him. Here, it's just kind of left a little bit ambiguous. And I want to reiterate that I didn't specifically go into watching this with intention to hate it. Like, I really wanted to give it a chance. I've been burned in the past, and so I think my standards are a little bit higher when it comes to live action anime because I've seen so many bad ones. like with the Death Note Netflix anime and Cowboy Bebop and all of that. But there are good ones I like out there too. I like the Alita movie. I'm in the minority that I like the Ghost in the Shell movie. So there are some live action anime that I like. And I was really hoping that this would do something for me. And all I can say is that it has a couple of good, funny moments with the characters, and it has pretty well choreographed action scenes, but that's not enough to save it from being a great series all on its own. I will never watch this again. And if you're new to Yu Yu Hakusho, I just fucking highly, 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 highly recommend just watching the anime. I know it's older now. I know it's 90s. So like some people, like younger fans, like I'm an old man, right? I'm in my mid 30s. All right. So like I love old style anime. I love anime from the 70s, 80s, 90s. Like that's my bread and butter. Like that's my jam. So I know some people don't like to go back and watch older anime. I get it. Whatever. But if you were open to it, I think the Yu Yu Hakusho anime is pretty much flawless. It pretty much adapts the manga perfectly. It only cuts out some stuff in the beginning. I think its action sequences are great. I think the dub is good. I think that the story itself really is just kind of exemplified perfectly within the anime, and that's the preferred way to go. I would not recommend this live action as your introduction, and if you're a longtime fan like me, maybe it's worth checking out to see some of the fight scenes and see some of the characters in live action, but this is something that I'll never go back to. Anyways, guys, if you watch the Yu Yu Hakusho live action, what do you think? Am I completely wrong? Is it amazing? Is it a masterpiece? Am I just like talking out my ass? Or do you agree with me that this just tried to do too much, too fast? It was the Yu Yu Hakusho speed run and it suffered tremendously for that. That's what I think. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching this video. I do appreciate it. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and a comment to help it out in the algorithm. Also, I do have some other Yu Yu Hakusho videos on the channel, so if you are new here, go ahead and check those out. I do praise the series quite a lot when it comes to the anime and manga, just not so much the live action. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching this video. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you later.